Hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. Your local government can reduce property taxes. Unfortunately, your city councilor, county commissioner, or other local elected representative might not even know it's within their capabilities to provide meaningful property tax relief in your local community. Thankfully, we have political professor Natalie Menten here to give you the information, the education that you need to present to your local elected representative to provide meaningful property tax relief in your community. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for being here today, and I really look forward to what you have to say.
Great. All right, so this is going to summarize some of the other previous videos we've done and just cover these quick steps on how you get from point A to point B, or in this case with hopscotch, step 1 to step 10. Quick steps to protest your local property tax levy. Keep in mind, this is different to protesting the valuation, which many people here in Colorado, especially this last summer, protested their valuation. This is lowering the levy itself. That is what the local governments set every year by vote, either October or November of each year. That's why we're talking about it right now. Give you a little bit of lead time. So this is a quick jump, hop, skip, and basically saving yourself money, whether it's your own property taxes or you're a consumer. It's passed on by the businesses who have got property. There's a lot of ways people end up paying into that fund for the government. All right, so the very first step, we've covered in a previous video, but let's cover it real quick here. Find your tax bill and your levies. The easiest way to do that, you can do it any time of day, it's free, is use the county assessor's property lookup tool. Most counties have this online. I don't know of any that don't, but it's freely accessible. In this case, I'm going to use the example of Logan County. So going quickly to Logan County and did a search for the assessor. It's got common questions. One of those you can find on most websites, public record search. There's a link, hyperlink, that allows you to go in, search for the property, sometimes just by address, others more on a owner level, depends on the site itself. And in this case, I decided to use, I thought would it just happen to be a good common address, 101 Main Street, in this case, West Main Street. And it popped up, there's one in Sterling, which happens to be owned by a Walgreens. And it's interesting in this slide, it brings up some of the different conversations I've had with people over the last month since we started doing the video series and really doing the outreach on this whole conversation about lowering the mill, that there are people who don't even realize large governments are paying these taxes too, or think about them being able to be modified, like the school district, the county. Those are the two of the largest, whether it's whatever county may be, large or small, two of the largest line items you'll find on a bill. In this case with Walgreens, you can see it's a little bit faint there, but down a little bit better on the bottom. It's nearly $50,000 a year that Walgreens is paying in for property taxes. Now, at the end of the day, Walgreens, the company, is paying the bill, but they are covering their overhead. So the consumer is the one that ends up covering that $50,000. The company is in the business of making profit. We agree with that, right? So they're going to pass those costs on. But let's look at these line items here. We've got Walgreens paying just over $17,000 to the county, Logan County. City of Sterling, just over $8,100 for 1 year to the city of Sterling. And then down to one of the largest ones we've talked about before, and that's the school districts. Here we've got that Walgreens putting in $22,000 nearly into the school district, and it all adds up. So governments have talked about, well, you know, the city only charges this little mill. That's the response I've gotten. Or the school is saying, well, you know, we don't have that much room to move and lower these mills. Well, the fact is, what we found, they can be lowered. And with the increase we've got coming in the valuations, these governments are going to be taking a huge bonus to the tune of 25, 50% potentially 70%, maybe even over 100, at least in some specific type of bills. But across Colorado, we were seeing clear double-digit figures. So that's a lot of money going in. If that comes to where we see that valuation increase, let's say 30%, take the increase of 30% on top of that, nearly $50,000. That makes a difference when you're going in to buy, whether it's, a bottle of aspirin or toilet paper, and it's passed on to the consumer. So when people are voting on Prop HH, which, by the way, doesn't have to go on the ballot, this property tax relief can be done without it. That's why we're talking about taking these tools that are available and getting your local governments to lower the tax. So you got thoughts on, looking at those bills, you can imagine across the state of Colorado how much governments are taking in additional at all these little local levels.
Definitely. I'd really encourage people to, type in your own address, maybe your employer, maybe a little small business that you like to frequent, or somebody else in your community. Really look up this mill levy rate in these local communities. Look at all these different levels of government that you're paying to. It can be shocking, I think, to some people. You might have no idea who these organizations are, who these local governments are that are taking your hard-earned money. And then just to think as well that $49,000 going to the government or multiple governments paid by this one business. Now, Walgreens probably doesn't get a lot of sympathy. It's a big company, from Illinois. I'm sure they probably can afford it, right? That's what most people would think. But think if you're a small business, is think if you have a local business that you've been setting up or a family business, and all of a sudden you're paying another $50,000 in overhead just to have your property there, just to be open. It's something people really need to be aware of, and I think this is giving people a more complete picture of the nature of our government and how things work, and really a key point in which people should be getting involved.
Well, and what's really notable also in this slide here is that we're looking at a value of commercial property, which pays higher amounts still. But this value, if you can highlight the total value there, you're going to see it is under the valuation. Yeah. Total value of this Walgreens is just over $2 million. Frankly, that's not a lot of money in real estate when it comes to more commercial holdings. So across the state, the amount of additional revenue that governments are going to see if they are not capped or limited or adjusted downward is going to be a huge impact on taxpayers. These local governments have to do something. And it should be notable right now that what we're talking about is not something that's unheard of in the local governments. There's actually, this is part of the normal process. There's an article that was a screenshot, and I didn't include it, where Polis was coming out after Prop HH and saying the local governments failed pretty much on not lowering the cap on the property taxes. And Colorado counties fired back at him and said, what are you talking about? We're supposed to be setting, you said this in April here. We don't set the mills until fall time, which is that October, November period we're talking about, where the local elected are going to vote on this. So this is supposed to be part of the process, but you can imagine if government is left unchecked, what are they going to do when it comes time to vote on the mill? I was at a meeting last night doing a rally call for Prop HH, and I've been an elected official for 8 years. So I've been on the other side where I'm voting on a budget, not necessarily mill because it was RTD, but on a budget, and watched dozens of government budget mill hearings. You'll see people that will testify on zoning stuff till 2 a.m. about whether some little store should be allowed to open or somebody can build, 12 sublots or whatever. But when it comes to a budget meeting and a mill levy meeting, nobody says anything. And the number one reason why that is probably because one, the government just kind of says well, we always need more. But secondly, because most people don't understand what is occurring at that moment at the tax rate is being set for that next year. So you don't have to dig through a 200-page budget book. There's a simple way to just kind of boil this down. So we're going to jump to that in this process here. Just jumping back to mill levies real quick, instead of henpecking through the different properties and looking through all these different ones and seeing what are all these different taxing agencies, the assessor actually with their website, and in this case I use the Logan County public website, has a list for mill levies. Click here, and when you open up that PDF, it will actually give you a lot of good warehoused information. This is the 2022 copy because 2023 hasn't been set yet. It's got the different value classes like residential, commercial. You can be able to see, well, where has it changed? We've gotten a lot more commercial property, residential, whatever you may want to see there. But more importantly, what it has a list here in the second column in this case that has all of the different mills for all the school districts and the fire districts, the special districts, and the county, cities and towns. So that's a good thing to make a copy of, save to file, because as you're going to talk to these different governments, you've got one place where you've got all of them listed at once. So what we are doing now is we just looked at the historicals. Now we want to go to what is the current rate. What is this figure that has come up that is going to be the basis, let's call it, for using in the calculation. So it's called the Certificate of Value Report. And the county assessors were required to have that done and sent electronically, I'm likely, maybe hard copy, to all the local governments by August 25th. So what that is saying is the county assessor has gone through, sent the valuation notices to all the public that are the property owners and said, this is what we think your property is valued at. And it's based off the last 2 years of sales, roughly. And that gave a value. Then people went through this property protest period through the summer, saying my property's not worth that much, not comparable to the house that sold 2 blocks away, etc. So the county assessors passed that stage now, at least the stage 1 of the protests. And they have these preliminary numbers on what are all the values within each jurisdiction's own district boundaries. Because then that governing body is going to then make a calculation off of that and say, it's basically like, here's the inventory of our city. And I think that's actually pretty disturbing that private property is considered like a property, a benefit, a piece where they own part of it and continue to benefit like they do. I mean, they've already taxed us on, I'm sorry, I'm going in a rant now, taxed us on income. They've taxed us on fees. They've taxed us on all these things. And now they're taxing our property with a tax lien if you don't pay it. Anyway, they come up with the whole government's portfolio of what they get a tax with these ad valorem taxes, which are property taxes. And so now you're able to, and I'm sorry, let me jump back. That was the deadline. You can actually, in many cases, find this online right now. That's what this slide is about. So again, we have the preliminary figure. So make sure that's what you're looking for. Don't look for final. Preliminary is okay. When you open up that document, it will give you then a dollar amount of the specific public subdivision you're looking for. So in this case, if you want to highlight for me, I guess I can do it here. Yes, that's the one. You know what I wanted. Thank you. This is the dollar amount that the county assessor says all of the properties in Lakewood have grown to over this last 2-year period. It's a preliminary number because all the protests aren't done yet. People are in stage 2 of protesting their valuation part. So now we see that in Lakewood's case, we actually have about a 24% increase in the valuations. And if left unchecked, that would mean the government would be taking in an additional 24% increase. Now, I should mention if that government doesn't have TABOR or the 5.5% law, there's going to be a cap on this amount. But too many governments in Colorado have waived that. So in Lakewood's case, there's a couple factors here, but number one is that in prior years, it's important to consider that. And at the end here, when we've taken the calculation, which is number one, we've got the total assessed value, and we're going to multiply it by the mill levy rate on the column next to it. In Lakewood's case, it's a 4.711 mill. That's a very common number for a city. The property tax collections would amount to then over $16.5 million, 16.6 million roughly. That is a $3.2 million gain over the prior year. So in prior year, they collected 13,408, as you see in the column here, column E. This year, it would, if based off of these values, be then instead over $16 million, the block cell below that, resulting in that 3.2 million additional. Now, the Lakewood City Charter, I came to find out, actually has a part of its charter that says it's supposed to be limited to no more than 7%. So I would hope that that would be the case, but I'll explain in a moment why I haven't found evidence that that limit exists. So now we jump to, we know, first of all, what the estimated amount is, what's the additional financial gain for the government, the percent of the increase. In our calculation, what we want to try to do here is give some options, because if we just let the government go unchecked and let them figure out numbers by themselves, that's way more than a tax, than what a consumer, a property owner, a renter, all the people, all the categories that pay property taxes, because that's what happens. Everybody's paying into it, whatever your situation. How much should the government be able to gain from that? In Lakewood's case, it's best to present 3 figures to start with, because it's really a negotiation game. You don't go on Craigslist and say, I want to sell this for X amount of dollars. And when that's, way off what your game plan really wants to be, you want to be envisioning this as a negotiation. In Lakewood's case, they have kept far too much money, so they need to be on an end where the taxpayer will have the biggest benefit. That means reducing potentially this 4.711 mil down to 3.5 mil, 3.7 mil, or 3.85. So the way that works, in the column to the right, in column C, you've got the 3 options, all of them being the same at that 3.530 million rounded. And then we've got the mill options, again, moving the decimal 3 to the side, to the left. And then what would the total gain be over that prior period? Now here you can see 2 of these cases reflect a negative amount. And I'm going to explain why in a moment. The additional 3rd option at the bottom allows a very slight gain to the government. Again, I'm not going to go with a very generous set of numbers here in this example, because the city of Lakewood, as I'm going to skip to this for just one moment, if we look at the historicals, there's 2 important things to look at here. Over the last 9 years, property values have jumped 70.8%. That's a 7.86% average annual increase. Now, What's puzzling to me again is the city charter, which I just discovered this little section recently, looking into all of this, has a 7% limit. So I don't understand why the city has taken the additional amounts. Now there's some small print people run into about should you include new construction and things like that. That could be a reason. But at the end of the day, are people getting an average almost 8% increase in their salaries? I'm like, and second thing I'll bring up on this slide is right now the city of Lakewood has a temporary Tabor waiver. And it's hard to see on that last 10 fiscal years chart there, but through the years 2015 through 2017, and actually in prior years too, I should mention, we had Tabor in place. And taxpayers were actually getting, in this case, $4 to $5 million a year back. And that was after allowing the generous growth that Tabor allows, which is inflation plus local growth. The government's allowed to grow by that each year. It's a reasonable amount, supposed to keep it in line with the economy. So when government continues to grow or gets Tabor waivers, they've benefited generously from the economy while taxpayers are struggling. When you look at those numbers, do you think dropping their property tax gains down to maybe a single percentage point is unreasonable, Brandon? What are your thoughts?
No, it's not unreasonable at all. I mean, this is the people's money. I mean, Tabor's so great because, this is 4 million, 5 million, nearly $6 million coming back into the economy, going back into people's pocketbooks, going back to businesses to keep them open, to be able to provide goods and services to the community. So, it's so important that we keep our tax refund money through Tabor, always be in defense of Tabor as well. But I mean, this is a lot of money. I mean, just over a 3-year period, you got nearly $15 million. It's a lot of money to take out of the economy for this greedy government and these politicians who want to take every penny they can.
Yeah. And I'm going to go backwards to this slide just once more. So looking at these percentages, minus 8%, minus 2.5%, or a gain of 1.36 are good places to start with. And if anybody plugs in these numbers following the steps, they should be able to come up with some options to present to their own body. Do you want to go with more of a 3% increase? That's I'll give you inflation numbers just real quick because I talked to the chief economist about this yesterday. Inflation last year with the Tabor formula is 4.2%. So that's they go at beginning of July to end of June cycle. They're not a January to December. So during this current cycle now, we're in an 8% inflation. I think that's high. I think because the factor I'll talk about in just a moment, right now, when we have inflation, the cost of goods go up at stores, right? We're paying more for toilet paper, we're paying more for a can of tomato sauce, whatever it may be. The government also bases their sales tax on what the cost of the good is. So government benefits by inflationary costs, right? Now they'll turn around and say, well, we faced inflation too. Matter of fact, they'll even say things, we buy different stuff than you, so we even have higher inflation. I call baloney on all of that, all right? Anyway, the government benefits in different ways, but going to, then what we did, we've started moving around here. We came up with a number, suggestions at least, because when you bring these resolutions forward, they always ask, how did you arrive at these numbers? So just having that gives somebody so much more of a solid foundation. I hope we've broken it down well enough. People feel confident in how to dig this stuff up. If they have any questions, please leave a comment, and we'll get the info or help post it so everybody can learn from it. That's probably the best way. All right, so now that you've come up with the numbers on what you want to present to the city council, it's good to have a resolution. And in my case, I'm pretty lucky. I'm in Lakewood, where there's 2 Lakewood city councilors who have already had this on their mind about the property taxes, and working together, we've created this resolution, and they've already stated they're going to present it to the rest of council because we've got our budget mill levy hearing coming up. And it's government talk laid out. So it's a lot of whereases, but it's just laying out basically the points. It's like bullet points, as it almost physically looks. So Lakewood's total taxable values increased 24%. And the taxable values these property taxes bear financial harm to the residents, payable in 2024. And that basically this is along the lines of this local government has a statutory duty to set it by December 15th. A lot of these local officials don't really, they get into office, don't really even know the whole flow of things. They're drinking from the fire hose. Make sure to lay it out. You've got a duty to set this, knowing they have a choice. And that, one of the important factors, 2023's Proposition HH, as we've talked about, doesn't have a property tax cap for home rule jurisdictions. And in this case, Lakewood is one of those. Giving an example that Lakewood would not be the only one, and the more that start to do this, the better. So Lakewood should follow the example of other jurisdictions, and I'm just giving a couple examples here as it starts to brew, that the counties of Mesa and Garfield have been public, at least elected officials on those bodies, that they want to see property tax relief by evaluating the mill levy, which would, if unchecked, raise the burden on tax burden to owners. And then the next one, important to keep or include in this, property taxes are a factor in housing affordability, and tax assessment should be limited to promote that financial stability instead of government's usual trend of government solves the problem, which we haven't seen evidence of that, have we? No. And so we continue to dump how much into billions into the solution. And we've got Prop 123, which is going to, anyway. Next one, in Lakewood's case, and this is like many local governments, the city of Lakewood has it under a temporary detaver. So we showed earlier that we were getting a property tax reduction. Our property taxes were capped because we had TABOR. Now we're under this temporary waiver. Thank God we're temporary, unlike some jurisdictions which gave it away unrighteously forever. Lakewood has retained nearly $38 million in taxpayers' Bill of Rights rebates due to this temporary waiver. And they have additional $7 million coming in over the initial 2022 budget. That's important because government budgets and what they actually take in are different things. So they got a kind of an extra boost in the income from the 2022 budget, money they hadn't counted on. And those otherwise would have been refunded to the taxpayers if we weren't under this temporary waiver. So they've kept the money. And prior to that, we got a property tax mill reduction. So the Lakewood's ability to keep money extends through year 2025. So they continue to take in more money. And I don't even, they're not even, I don't think, counting in this big bonus they're going to get from the property taxes yet. But back to, whereas the city of Lakewood over the last few years, again, we've seen property tax values increase and increase and increase. This is not a brand new, fresh thing here. They've kept 24% more in tax revenue over a 3-year period. That's an average of 8%. It's over what the charter says they should be able to keep. And at the end of the day, people are not taking that much home in additional income. So the government is coming out ahead of the game while the taxpayer is losing. And whereas, as I mentioned before, we're facing an inflation issue right now. Things may start to get better. Meanwhile, who's benefiting from those cost of goods sales going up? The government is doing that. The more the inflated cost of the good, the higher the sales tax they collect. And back to, here's just again, this is like a formal document. In this one, I'm stating The city charter says, under this, in this case, 12.12, that the city council shouldn't levy a ad valorem tax, which is property tax, in an amount greater than was levied in the preceding year plus 7%, with exceptions. That's where the exceptions are. Is it new construction? Was it annexed? Those are the two. But even with all of that, the end of the day, if they're left unchecked, they will take as much of that 24% as they can, while they should be limiting to something along the lines of 3% or less. And then in that last spot, you can fill in options like we're presented here, or come up with a hard rate. Of course, you can always just say it should not exceed, by 2%, 3% flat rate, instead of using a specific mill levy. So there's lots of ways to frame that resolution. But the more that an activist can lay this out, perhaps for an elected official, or even a rally call, put it on Nextdoor. Say, hey, here's a copy of the resolution. It's going to be submitted. Will you show up to public testimony and help me out? People will be surprised. There's so many public governments that hear really very little public comment on the local level. Really need to step up the roar. Okay.
Definitely, Natalie. No, I love it. The citizens do need to roar, do need to speak up and stand up, speak out, and really be advocates for their own livelihood, really, and keeping these property taxes as low as possible. To keep that money, because as you said, this inflation, and it's so perverse that you hear these city governments, these local governments, just increasing their revenue based on inflationary schemes where the people have less money and these politicians now are benefiting from it. I mean, that's something that can't be understated, I think. But I think this has been a great video, really great presentation, primarily because it does lay out all the steps, for an individual to discover, hey, where are we at? Where are we at as a community? Where are our neighbors at? Where am I at as a property owner? Where can we get to? Let's put all the numbers together. Let's get the facts and the figures. Let's provide the background so we can really make a compelling case to these local elected officials. Here's the resolution. Here's all the data to back it up. Here's what needs to be done. Being informed, being educated, and being able to actually present this well to local elected officials and build up some citizen involvement, I think is invaluable and more important now than ever. So really applaud you for this presentation. I think there's a lot of value here that can be useful for years to come.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I don't know that I said before, it really should be said now then, is that what Proposition HH first didn't have to even go on the ballot to offer relief. The only point is to take TABOR refunds, and it grows government by 1 percentage point above the cap, chewing into more of our refunds. That's why we talk about eliminate it. It will eliminate it eventually. But with the Proposition HH, they try to claim property tax relief. It says it has two parts to it. Lower the assessment, which is what the state could have done anyway at the Capitol. The second part is it claims to have a local property tax cap. The problem is they have one carve out called the school district. As we've seen here, one of the largest line items on a property tax bill. They don't fall under the cap. The other is home rule jurisdictions. We just described here Lakewood doesn't fall under the property tax cap because of the home rule carve out. But then secondly, all those local governments that are still under that cap, the other big chunk of this supposed relief in HH, there's no relief in this Prep HH. Okay, those local governments still that weren't carved out get to have a local meeting. They'll take public comment, but 3, 5, 7, 11, maybe there's 13 elected board representatives can waive the property tax cap. So this local bill reduction has to be done whether Prop HH fails or passes. And so bringing it up because maybe somebody's first time watching it, but people are just starting to kind of grasp that when people say, what is the solution to HH? Well, this is the solution. it's not to just say we wait till the legislature, we do this now, then we put the pressure also on the legislature come January. So it's a time to get excited, get motivated. We may kill HH, but we got to do this too.
Yeah,
So I'm
definitely.
glad
I
that
mean,
I'm really thrilled that you're doing this video series. Somebody told me today, by the way, that it's really great to have this because they haven't really heard this discussion elsewhere. And I give that to Free State Colorado for providing the literal bandwidth to do it.
well, wonderful, Natalie. Well, I've got to thank you as well. This video series on property taxes, of course, you're the key component here and sharing your information, your expertise, being this political professor, giving us all this valuable information that you've been gathering in your mind for years and years. And it's really exciting to be able to share that information with people out in Colorado and give people the literal playbook to take control of their local governments, to lower their property taxes, and to become effective liberty activists. I mean, it is really compelling and really exciting. So thank you for everything, and I look forward to hearing from you next time.
Sounds good. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, take care.
Thanks.